911, what's the address of the emergency? I think we're on 75. How many people are hurt, do you know? Okay, hold on. Oh my goodness, how many vehicles have been involved in?
Safety standards, purity standards for water, standards for the use of pesticides. They would not have passed if it hadn't been for Ralph Nader. But his real legacy is about changing the way in which Americans think about the right to be safe from dangerous products.
The simple knowledge that there's somebody to point to when someone tells you you can't fight City Hall, when someone says that money's so powerful, that politicians are so corrupt, there's nothing that one citizen can do, and you can just say, hey, would you forget Ralph Nader?
In 1965, 50,000 people died in car accidents on U.S. roadways. Although safety equipment such as seatbelts existed, the majority of American car manufacturers chose not to include them because of their additional costs.
Car manufacturers had no interest in developing cars that protected the people inside.
There were many people concerned with the lack of safety standards in the auto industry. However, these concerns were not brought to national attention until 1965, when the book Unsafe at Any Speed was written by a young lawyer named Ralph Nader. Ralph Nader was born in the small town of Winsted, Connecticut, where he'd be taught many of the values that would guide him throughout the rest of his career.
Ralph's experience in Winsted, Connecticut really shaped him. His father ran a restaurant where he listened to people talk politics. His family brought the kids around the dinner table and really insisted that they pay attention to the world about them in every way.
I first became interested in auto safety because I hitchhiked a lot as a youngster, and I hitchhiked all over the country. And when you're picked up by truckers, sometimes you get to the scene of a horrible crash before the police and emergency personnel get there, and it is really a terrible, grisly scene. What got me interested in more crash-worthy cars, which means seatbelts today, airbags, padded dash, all the things that can make you escape serious injury even if you are in a crash. And I did a paper at Harvard Law School, which I turned into the book Unsafe at Any Speed, that came out in November 1965.
New York lawyer Ralph Nader, a legal advisor to the United States Senate inquiry, has just published a book called Unsafe at Any Speed. In an interview with Werner Troyer, Nader documents his charges that the car makers fail to build safety into their products.
Let's start with the Corvair. You say that the Corvair for 3 or 4 years was an unsafe vehicle to drive. Isn't that a pretty wild exaggeration?
No, I think the Corvair had a rear axle, which under certain predictable conditions of driving, at certain speeds, even as low as 25 miles an hour, it required a very sensitive type of tire pressure. And if this tire pressure was not right, the car would suddenly and unexpectedly go out of control.
He took that single car, the Corvair, and he made it an image of, or a symbol of, what was wrong with the industry in general, and that car makers would try and cover up problems that were leading to accidents and deaths.
Nader was called before a Senate subcommittee interested in improving car safety laws. As news coverage for these hearings grew, Nader became hopeful that real change could occur. However, as his fame grew, Nader began to get the feeling that he was being watched. These suspicions were confirmed when a private investigator was found trailing Nader to one of the hearings. On March 22, 1966, General Motors President James Roche was called before the Senate subcommittee to answer allegations of witness intimidation.
I want to apologize here and now to the members of this subcommittee and Mr. Nader. I sincerely hope that these apologies will be accepted.
5 months later, President Johnson signed the National Highway Safety Act, which required seatbelts to be placed in all American cars. However, this was not the end of GM's troubles. Later that year, Nader filed an invasion of privacy lawsuit against them. This would result in a $600,000 settlement, which Nader would use to help found consumer advocacy networks across the country.
I didn't think being a lone ranger was enough. We had to have a lot of people working in fighting for justice, fighting health, safety, environmental improvements, the kind of silent violence that corporations wreak on people. And so I started a lot of groups, and they were often led by students. And each task force had an area.
Ralph Nader played a crucial role in forming the first PIRGs. In 1970, he toured college campuses and spoke about the idea of students forming their own organization to advocate for change in policy at the local, state, and federal level. Following his speaking tour, Ralph Nader and Donald Ross co-authored and published a book called Action for a Change, which provided the blueprint for how to start PIRG chapters on campuses across the country.
In addition to local PIRGs, Nader would help to found groups such as Public Citizen, the Auto Safety Center, and the Center for Responsive Law.
One of the things that he has led a charge for is the strengthening of groups that actually do act as these watchdogs, that hold people accountable for what they say and for what they do, for the chemicals that they put in the water or the air, for the products that they create. And that sense of public accountability is really, really important.
To me, the biggest lesson from Ralph Nader is never underestimate the power that an individual can have in bringing together a group of people to fight for something.
Throughout the 60s and 70s, Nader would use these skills to fight for consumer protection in many areas, such as food and drug oversight, air and water pollution, and freedom of information.
The Atlantic magazine a couple years back did an article naming the 100 most important people in American history. Two of the people on the list were alive, and one of them was Ralph. And they were right on the money. And the accomplishment that put him on that list was that extraordinary decade.
Taken as a whole, there are very few people living today who have had as much impact on the quality of life in the United States than Ralph Nader.